Good evening, everybody. So for today, I will try to land the Boeing 747 in Melbourne, Australia. So we're going to fly from Sydney to Melbourne. This is a difficult plane to operate, I have discovered. I've only been able to successfully land it once, and that's with generous amount of runway space. So I will try to do it again today and do the best that I can. So to start, we need power, so we're going to turn on battery master. We also have external power available, so we will turn that on as well. So we now have power to all of our AC buses. We will release the parking brake. Now to start, so we can take off external power, we're going to turn on our APU. Not the switch I meant to use. So we'll hold that and start for a moment, and we'll put it back to on. And then when our APU generators are available, the computer will tell us. So many of you will notice that throughout this I have a whole lot of tooltips and dialogue boxes that pop up periodically. I don't actually know how to fly airplanes, so I'm doing my best considering the circumstances. So now both of our APU generators are available. So now we're going to turn on, so the APU generators are running, so now we can, external power is now off. Alright, so to start our engines, we're going to go down here to where the fuel cutouts are, put all 4 engines to run. Now one of the interesting things about this is this is the newest version of the Boeing 747, the Boeing 747 8 International, but 4-engine aircraft are largely becoming obsolete, mainly for economical reasons, and of course stuff like COVID-19 didn't help that situation. So therefore these are fairly uncommon in the world. I think there are only like dozens of examples that are flying. So this is the passenger variant. The cargo variant is actually more popular, mainly because the Boeing 747, like the whole like nose cone will like flip up, and that makes it easier to load large cargo. So for the next part of starting our engines, we're going to turn all these fuel pumps on.
Sydney ground, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo requesting the end of pushback. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo request to end pushback received.
Alright, so our fuel pumps are running, cross-feed is enabled, so we should be able to start our engines. Ordinarily, you'd start them one at a time and look at the data, but to save time, I'm just going to start them all. I'll just verify here, so fuel is maybe running the engines. We'll find out in a moment if I'm able to start them.
Sydney ground, Boeing November Uniform
Alright,
Charlie Papa Whiskey
so
Romeo
all 4 engines are starting up. We have fuel to all of them.
Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo taxi to and hold short of runway 34 left using taxiway India November Tango Lima.
So one of the bits of feedback that I got the previous time is that engine noise was too loud. I turned engine noise down a little bit, so that should help in this particular case.
India November Tango Lima Tree Alpha Cross Runway 25 Alpha Alpha 6 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo.
It looks like all our engines are running. which is good. I'm going to turn on all 4 engine generators now that the engine is running. All of them are steady at idle speed. I've obviously done something wrong, so I'll fix that. Engines are all running. I'm going to turn all the engine generators on. Alright, we should be good. I'm not sure which switch I have misconfigured, so for now we'll just leave the APU on. We have plenty of fuel today and we're not going very far. So we're going to reverse engines and back up a little bit. So I don't know a whole lot about game streaming, so if anybody has any good suggestions for me, I'm more than open to it. I'm not very familiar with either like Facebook gaming, YouTube gaming, or Twitch. So for now, I'm just sort of using the XSplit software to stream directly to Facebook. So for this today, I haven't checked Facebook yet, and I can't see any comments if anybody has commented anything. So I don't know what anybody has said, but as soon as I'm in the air, I'll monitor it regularly. What I want is for this to be sort of a discussion for people who are smarter with this stuff than me, so that I can make this better. Taxiing is something that I'm working on. I can almost never seem to taxi without exceeding the speed limit. I'll use a little bit of brake here to help. I have all throttle levers at 6%. And then still I'm accelerating. Alright, so while we're taxiing, since we're mostly on the straight and narrow now, we'll set flaps to like 10%-ish. Which, that should be sufficient for takeoff. Alright, so we're almost at the end of the runway. The good news today, for at least for takeoff, is there appears to be almost no wind at all. I've had to make very little rudder adjustments during this long stretch of taxiing to get to the end of the runway. There is another player in my way, apparently, so I'll do my best to steer around him. Or maybe it appears he is gone. No, he's taking off right now.
Tower, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo at runway 34, left ready for takeoff departure to the west. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo cleared for takeoff runway 34, left west departure approved. Cleared for takeoff runway 34, left Boeing Papa
So
Whiskey
hopefully
Romeo.
that dude will be out of our way, and then we can be on our way. So I'm now cleared for takeoff. Departure is approved. So as soon as I'm straight on the runway, we'll get the hell out of here. Alright. Now that we're on the runway, we'll throttle all engines to 100%. Alright, so now off the ground, so we'll reduce throttle to prevent excessive airspeed.
Whiskey Romeo, continue for west departure. I will contact you next when you leave my airspace. Sydney Tower,
We're going to
Boeing
zero
November
our
Uniform
flaps.
Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, continue for west departure. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo, you are leaving my airspace. Frequency change approved. Sydney Tower, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, frequency change. Approach Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo is type Boeing B748, 3 miles north of Sydney, minus 100 feet. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace.
Probably zeroed my flaps a little bit earlier than I should have. We're still good. We're building airspeed, we're getting altitude. And here we'll fly over Sydney, Australia.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo radar contact 5 miles north of Sydney, 800 feet. Cleared through the Charlie airspace. Maintain on navigation. Cleared through the Charlie airspace.
We're going a little bit fast for this altitude, but it's alright. Not sure what that clicking noise is. I'm sure that I've done something that I shouldn't. Put our gear up.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo, contact Melbourne Center on 129.8. Going to 129.8 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Melbourne Center, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, 7,800 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, Melbourne Center, continue as planned. Altimeter tree 0.4 tree.
Alright, so everything in here looks good. I haven't entered anything into the flight computer because I'm not nearly that fancy. However, to some extent the autopilot should still work. We're above 10,000 feet, so I'll engage that now. Flight director on. Auto throttle arm is on. So now we're going to engage the LNAV mode and arm autopilot. Also engage VNAV as well. Everything looks pretty good right now.
Papa Whiskey Romeo, contact Sydney approach on 124.55.
Turn VNAV mode off.
124.55 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Sydney approach, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, 11,300 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Sydney approach. Continue as planned. Altimeter
Raise our
30
airspeed,
decimal 42.
as well as our altitude.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo contact Melbourne Center on 129.8. Going to 129.8 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Melbourne Center Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo 11,600 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Melbourne Center continue as planned. Altimeter 30.42. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo contact Sydney approach on 124.55. 124.55 for Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Sydney approach Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo 11,300 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Sydney approach continue as planned. Altimeter 30.42.
I don't really know how to use the autopilot settings, so I sort of just do the best I can. I've been reading a whole lot of internet articles on what the difference between like LNAV, VNAV is, FLC mode, but I haven't built a full understanding yet, so I'm working on that.
November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo 9,800 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Melbourne Center continue as planned. Altimeter 30.41. Diamond Uniform November Uniform you are 72 miles northeast. Climb and maintain 4,100 feet. Expect vectors visual runway 4 approach. Generic Zulu Charlie Delta traffic is 10 o'clock 4 miles at 3,400 feet Diamond to 40. Report them in sight. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo contact Sydney approach on 124.55. Going to 124.55 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Sydney approach Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo 9,600 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Sydney approach continue as planned. Altimeter 30.42.
The autopilot is struggling to maintain airspeed and altitude, most likely because I've configured it. But we might be making some progress. Angle of attack is really high. Alright, so it looks good to go. Altitude's whatever, but airspeed is good.
Contact Melbourne Center on 129.8.
I'm not sure why it's not maintaining my
Going to 129
autopilot
decimal 8
altitude
Boeing
setting.
Papa Whiskey Romeo.
So, if any of you
Melbourne Center, Boeing
who's
November
watching knows how to
Uniform
fly
Charlie Papa
airplanes,
Whiskey
I would
Romeo
appreciate any
10,400
advice.
feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Melbourne Center, continue as planned. Altimetry 0.42.
Alright, so looks like we're getting altitude now as well, which is encouraging. Perhaps the computer just wanted to establish airspeed first. And now we're 349 nautical miles away from Melbourne. But it may be less should I get bored and just decide to land somewhere else.
Jetstar 510 traffic
But
is 12 o'clock, 4 miles at 13,500 feet.
so far, so good.
Report them in sight. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo traffic is 2 o'clock, 3 miles at 15,100 feet generic.
I agree, there is traffic.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo traffic in sight.
I assume this is because neither myself nor the other players actually feel obligated to listen to air traffic control. Sometimes if the taxiway is too long, I'll just take off anyway on the taxiway without even bothering to go to the runway because, fuck it, right? Alright. So, it looks like the winning combination of autopilot set points to get the aircraft to actually do what I want it to do is LNAV mode enabled, which is location and GPS based, and FLC, which I don't really know what it does quite yet. I haven't read enough stuff on the internet. But with both of those and location mode on, looks like we're good.
Descend and maintain 2,800 feet, Jetstar 510.
I'm certain that all of you are making fun of me in the chat. So I'll open that now. And as I expected, nobody is interested, and they suggest I play Crimson Skies, which is interesting because I'm not sure if that game will run on a modern computer, but I'll sure give it a try, I guess. For those of you who played the original Crimson Skies, and I don't mean like the abortion that they released for the Xbox, but the original PC version back in the late 90s, the best mode in that was the Zeppelin versus Zeppelin, where you'd play with another player. Each person would have a Zeppelin and 2 fighters that would support it, and then your goal was to protect your own Zeppelin while in turn destroying the opposing one. And yeah, it's been a while, but I think the Warhawk was my favorite airplane to play in Crimson Skies. I think it was the one with like 3 engines on it, so it looked weird. Once again, I want today to be more of a discussion with all of you. So please comment whenever possible anything that you think that is helpful, or if it's not helpful, comment anyway.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo, you're leaving my airspace radar service terminated squawk 7000. Frequency change approved. Squawk 7000. Frequency change approved. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Melbourne Center, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo is type Boeing B748, 6 miles southwest of Yankee Oscar Papa Sierra. Request flight following. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, Melbourne Center. Squawk 6015. Squawk 6015, Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo radar contact 4 miles east of Yankee Golf Lima Bravo flight level 215. Copy. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo contact Melbourne Center on 133.15. 133.15 for Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Melbourne Center, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo flight level 220. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, Melbourne Center, continue as planned.
Alright, so it looks like everything is good right now. We're still 300 nautical miles away from Melbourne, which I guess is a little bit longer than I had intended. But I'm sure my co-pilot has this, so I'll take a break for a minute or two, and I'll be right back. Alright, I have returned, just like Douglas MacArthur. However, unlike General MacArthur, I returned significantly faster. So, for anybody who's watching, I think it's maybe like 2 or 3 of you now. But if for anybody who's still watching, if you have any experience with like game streaming, should I use Twitch or YouTube Gaming or Facebook Gaming? If anyone has any input, I would definitely appreciate. Looks like we have plenty of fuel at 317,000 pounds. We won't have to turn on our override pumps here for main 2 and 3, as we still have plenty of fuel in both the center as well as main 1 and 4. Ah, that's a mistake I made earlier. I never turned on my engine generators. But now they are on, so we can turn off. Maybe not. Re-engage autopilot. So I'm not sure what I did with regards to the autopilot that, or not the autopilot, but the APU in my electrical distribution lineup, such that I can't turn the APU off. All of the generators are running, and the bus ties are set to auto for all of these. Well, I guess I'll try it one more time, see if it disrupts avionics. Oh, it sure did. Well, we're just gonna turn that back on. Maybe the generators were off. Ah, perhaps we'll give this one more try. Ah! Everything still has power. Excellent. Now we can turn our auxiliary power unit off. Alright, so that is all good. So now we are only 221 nautical miles away from Melbourne. Down below you can see Australia. The game's helpful advice for people who don't fly airplanes keeps suggesting that I should reset my altimeter to whatever the correct altitude this thing should be flying at. It is probably somewhere north of 30,000 feet. But I just like it here, so we're just going to stick with it. Our fuel burn will be a little bit higher, but we still have 75% of our fuel remaining, so it won't matter. So it'll still be a little while before I get to Melbourne. Once again, I've only been able to successfully land this aircraft maybe once before, so I will do my best today. See, when you play video games, it's like flying airplanes is easy, but I have discovered that flying airplanes actually is not very easy, especially ones this large.
Calling Papa Whiskey Romeo, contact Melbourne Center on 125.2. 125.2 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Melbourne Center, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa
Once again,
Whiskey
I
Romeo,
encourage
flight
anybody
level
to
220.
put anything in the comments, especially with regards to game streaming, what should I use, etc. So if anyone has any helpful options, I'd definitely appreciate it. So unlike the last time that I streamed where I overrode weather, today we have live weather enabled in addition to live players. So, if anybody who is watching this is in Australia on this date, it is a very nice day outside. So there's no approach data in the computer because I haven't entered it, so I'll do this manually to the best that I can. There's also no nav data because I did not enter that or submit a flight plan at all. But in the end, I'm sure everything will be fine. All that stuff is for nerds anyway. It looks like I didn't bother to turn on any of the required lights, but that's no big deal. At least all the important stuff is good, like now we actually have electricity being generated by the engines as opposed to the APU, so that is definitely a positive. Plenty of gas in the tank. So we're only about 158 nautical miles away from Melbourne, so probably like 20 minutes-ish before we make our final approach. best part about having a multi-monitor display for your computer is that you can do this while you do other things if you're on a particularly long flight. So today this one is fairly short, but like last night when I was flying airplanes, I ran this on one monitor, as well as my other screens to assist me with stuff like the camera, ATC checklist, and the VFR map, which you could pop out and put on other monitors. But then at the same time, I can sort of just let this do its thing and then like watch like Archer in the background, which was the case last night. What is the fastest this thing can go? Looks like 360 knots, so we'll set it to like 358. So I'm growing impatient with our flight to Melbourne, so I have raised the airspeed in the autopilot to 358 knots. So that should shorten the duration a little bit. like I won't have to worry about fuel for the rest of this because we still have over 300,000 pounds of fuel on board. And in main 1 and main 4, we have a combined about 70,000 pounds of fuel. Therefore, we shouldn't have to engage the override pumps that are up here in order to continue fuel flow to the engines. So the first time I streamed, there was a fuel delivery issue. So if I used my like cheesy external view, like this one that I get to use to observe all of like the beautiful scenery, I sometimes miss some of the details. So that's why on the first flight that I streamed, I crashed, because even though that was a significantly easier to airplane to fly than this one, the problem with that one is that because I wasn't using that view, I didn't have my fuel being drawn from where it was supposed to, and my engine shut down, and I lost significant airspeed and altitude without an easy way to fix it. Or, you know, easy for my skill level, I guess. So for here, I've loaded a ton of fuel, so that regardless, we're going to be fine. And that may invoke some trim issues when it comes to landing. Once again, as I've discovered, airplanes are not like easy to fly. We should be okay. I have been able to land this airplane once successfully, so today we should be able to do it again. Now we're about 90 nautical miles away from Melbourne. Once we get to about maybe 3040-ish, I will start flying manually, and I will do my best to land this. I encourage comments for the two of you that are still with me. If you want to leave comments, then especially feedback, I appreciate for how I can improve this process. Interesting. Alright, so now that we're close enough, I'll start reducing altitude and airspeed. So we're going to disengage autopilot. Or try to. Thought the push button would do that. Flight director off, auto throttle off. I'm going to reduce engine throttle significantly. That sound means autopilot is now off. I'm going to adjust trim to make it a little bit more neutral.
Melbourne Center, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, Melbourne Center. Cleared through the Charlie airspace.
We're going a little fast.
Cleared through Charlie airspace, Boeing Papa
So I'll
Whiskey
reduce
Romeo.
throttle almost to nothing so we can trim off some airspeed. Trim down a little bit more.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo, you're leaving my airspace. Resume on navigation. Contact Melbourne Center on 124.0. 124.0 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo.
Probably should have done a lot of this earlier, or at least entered the information appropriately into my autopilot to eliminate some of this excess energy that I have at this point.
Melbourne Center, Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo, Melbourne Center. Cleared through the Charlie airspace. Cleared through Charlie airspace, Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo.
Because the problem with coming in so fast is that with the airspeed combined with our altitude, we just have so much energy at this point. And what I'm trying to do is dissipate as much of that as I can to make landing not impossible. I'm trying to reduce altitude. Airspeed is still coming up, obviously, because I'm reducing altitude. I have my all 4 engine thrust levers at about 9%.
Romeo, contact Melbourne approach on 132.0. 132.0 for Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo. Melbourne approach Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo 9,700 feet. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Melbourne approach continue as planned. Altimeter 30.16. Melbourne Tower Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo is 11 miles northeast with India to land. Boeing November Uniform Charlie Papa Whiskey Romeo Melbourne Tower. Make left downwind runway tree 4. Altimeter tree 0.13 wind tree 52 at 29er. Enter left downwind runway tree 4 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo.
Alright, so now I'll try to land. Luckily, I have a little bit of help from the guidelines for my approach, so I'll take advantage of that. We're still going a little bit too fast, and our altitude is still a little bit too high, but we're working on both, and we should be good. Alright, so in here, we're going to set our flaps to about 20 degrees. That'll help with our airspeed problem. We'll throttle engines up a little bit.
Oscar 3 Heavy, turn next taxiway. Oscar 3 Heavy, turn next taxiway.
2500.
Oscar 3 Heavy exit runway when able. Oscar 3 Heavy contact ground on 121.7. Going to 121.7 Oscar 3 Heavy. Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo cleared to land runway 34. Wind 351 at 29er. Cleared to land runway 34 Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo.
Alright, now we'll make our final approach. Hopefully I do well. Gear down. I did that turn pretty poorly, so it's not looking good. We'll reduce engines. I'm still significantly off center.
500. 400.
We'll use the rudder a little bit to help us out.
200. 100.
Engine 0. Reverse
40.
thrust.
20. 10.
Airspeed's still too high. We're going for it.
Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo contact ground on 121.7. 121.7 for Boeing Papa Whiskey Romeo.
Running out of runway. Still over 100 knots. Alright, now we have successfully landed the Boeing 747 at Melbourne. Although we did tear up some of the grass. Alright, so now we'll just park and we'll turn all the shit off and then we're good to go. Here looks good. They probably didn't care much about this grass anyway. Thrust levers are at 0. Then inside we're gonna turn our APU on. Alright, so we're going to wait for the APU to come up, then I'll turn on the APU and we'll shut down all the engines. Oops, didn't mean to do that. APU generators 1 and 2 are connected. We can turn engine generators off. Now we can shut down our engines and we're good for the day. Turn off all of the fuel pumps. Fuel supply is cut off. All 4 engines are shut down. And then there you have it, folks. That's a successful landing with the Boeing 747 TAC 8 International at Melbourne.